Please subscribe for more videos. Click the bell icon for more updates. Region could flare up at any time. Prime Minister Imran Khan warns US. Expressing concern over India's antiques in Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir, Prime Minister Imran Khan has warned that the region is a hotspot that could flare up at any time, urging the United States to treat in an even-handed manner. In an interview with German magazine Der Spiegel, Prime Minister Imran reflected that the US is under the impression that India could limit China's influence in the region. But it is a completely flawed premise. India is a threat to its neighbors, to China, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and to us, said the Premier. It has the most extremist, racist government in the subcontinent. It is a fascist state inspired by the Nazis in the 1920s and 30s. Prime Minister Imran said Islamabad expected even handed treatment from the US with respect to India, especially with the dispute in Kashmir. The region is a hot spot. It could flare up at any time. That's why we expect the US as the strongest country in the world to be even handed, whoever becomes the president. Explaining the ruling BJP anti-Islam manifesto, the premier said, read the writings of the RSS, the intellectual forerunner of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's party. They openly admired Hitler. The Nazis wanted to get rid of the Jews. The RSS wanted to get rid of the Indian Muslims. The unorthodox ways of Imran and Trump. Responding to a question about the US elections, Prime Minister Imran noted that Joe Biden was in front in the opinion polls, but Donald Trump is very unpredictable because he is not like normal politicians. He plays by his own rules, said the premier with a hint of admiration that didn't go unnoticed by his interviewer. The Prime Minister reminisced that as a politician who started his own party and then built it up with into the biggest party in Pakistan over 22 years, he also had to do a lot of out of the box thinking. We were the first to rely on social media and the first to attract the youth to our rallies, he explained. We had to be very unorthodox, and in some ways, Donald Trump does that too. The leverage to restore peace. Explaining Pakistan's role in the Afghanistan peace deal, Prime Minister Imran dismissed the perception of Islamabad's close ties with the Taliban. With 2.7 million Afghan refugees in Pakistan, we have a certain amount of leverage, which was used to the utmost, he explained. I am very pleased that we succeeded. The Premier observed that Pakistan had nothing to do with the 9/11 terror attacks and reiterated that the country shouldn't have gotten involved in the war in Afghanistan. I opposed it from day one. The US put pressure on us, and the military dictator Pervez Musharraf succumbed to that pressure. Prime Minister Imran reminded the interviewer that Osama bin Laden was a hero in the 1980s. He supported the Mujahideen against the Soviets in Afghanistan, and he was backed by both the CIA and Pakistan. It was Pakistan's right to recognize the Taliban, but Pakistan had no control over the Taliban. When Pakistan asked the Taliban to hand over Osama bin Laden to the Americans, they refused. No one can predict which way things will go in Afghanistan right now, he said. What I can say is that over Afghanistan, the country that wants peace most is Pakistan. That after Afghanistan, the country that wants peace most is Pakistan. We have almost lost 70,000 people in this conflict, and our tribal areas adjacent to the Afghan border have been devastated in the last 15 years. Half of the people in these areas have become internally displaced. About 1.5 million of them have become victims of the conflict between the Pakistan Taliban and the army. Prime Minister Imran said his government from day one has been fostering dialogue, he said. He spoke to Afghan's High Council for National Reconciliation lead Dr. Abdullah prior to meeting with Gulbuddin Hikmatyar. We have no favorites in Afghanistan. Our only interest is that the future government in Kabul doesn't allow India to operate from there against Pakistan. He asserted, stressing that Hikmatyar not only accepts the constitution in Afghanistan but also participated in elections. Regretting the double game image given to Islamabad, Prime Minister Imran said it started in the 1980s after the Iranian Revolution. Many in the West began looking at the Muslim countries as if there was a divide between liberals and fundamentalists. A very artificial assessment, he reflected. Muslim countries are no different from other communities. All communities are divided into moderates, which make up the majority, and the extremists. A colossal disaster. Stressing his push for peace, Prime Minister Imran said he offered mediation in the Yemen conflict as soon as he came into power. Such a colossal human rights disaster is going on there. The premier said he spoke with Iran and the Saudi Arabia's Mohammed bin Salman, but you can't force anybody to agree on peace talks if they don't want. Prime Minister Imran noted that the Saudi-Iran war would be a disaster, devastating for countries all over the world, especially the poor, and the price of oil would shoot up. Discussing Middle East's growing ties with Israel, Prime Minister Imran reiterated Pakistan's position. Every country has its own foreign policy priorities. They have to think about their own people, and it's their decision. As for Pakistan, the founder of the nation, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, a brilliant man, spoke in the 1940s about the Palestinian situation as a huge violation of human rights. Pakistan still takes this view, he asserted. Unless there's a just settlement, we cannot recognize Israel, letting Thailand shine. The premier has never shied from sharing his admiration of the Chinese governance model. He told Der Spiegel it was remarkable that China lifted 700 million people out of poverty within a short period of 40 years. This is the model I want to emulate in Pakistan, he explained. Despite not having electoral politics, they are good at bringing the best people to the top to their country. It's a system based on meritocracy. Prime Minister Imran admired how the Communist Party sort of sifts through all the talent and brings it to the top. Furthermore, in the past 7 years, China has put 450 ministerial level officials in jail on corruption charges. He continued. Countries aren't poor because of a lack of resources. It's because of the corruption among the leadership. As we know from the Panama Papers, the same is true for Pakistani politicians. Millions of dollars went into properties in the most expensive areas in London, siphoned off from the country. Inflation is real. The premier said he was undeterred by the opposition uniting against him, terming the movement a blackmail to get off corruption cases. But there is no way I will ever relent, he stressed. Look, we are facing the biggest trade gap in our history. Prime Minister Imran noted that Pakistan's imports were $60 billion, but exports were only $20 billion. The rupee is falling and there is inflation because we import fuel. Everything is getting more and more expensive, even electricity, he admitted. We have to raise our revenues, so we have to increase our tax base, he explained. We are going through these painful reforms, and all these guys from the opposition get together. They are worried that once we stabilize things, they will all end up in jail because of huge corruption cases. COVID-19 strategy. As a leader of a country with one of the lowest COVID-19 tallies, Prime Minister Imran explained his government decided to impose smart lockdowns, keeping in view that almost half of the population lived on the daily and weekly wages. We only restricted areas if we found that there was an outbreak. And we didn't stop our supply lines. We didn't stop the agriculture sector and quickly reopened the construction sector because that's what employs the most people in the urban areas. That saved us, he reflected. India instead restricted people to their homes in poor areas, a complete lockdown. They have a lot of poverty now, same in Iran. Imran said around 180,000 to 2 lakh people are getting tested every week as the national coordination team looks at multiple statistics with a clear composite picture of the epidemic. From peak numbers in June, we saw a steady decline in cases, positivity and the deaths across the country until late August. Now we are hoping to survive the second wave. So who helps him make these decisions? Only a fool doesn't talk about everything with his wife, said the premier. She has great wisdom. I discuss everything with her, also problems I face in government, dealing with complex situations, he continued. She is my soulmate. She is my companion. I would not have survived without her. More free than the West. When asked about the new law prohibiting media to report on the military, the Prime Minister said there would be another way of dealing with security forces, not through the media but through the government. I will speak to the army chief if I think there is something wrong, he said. There are always human rights violations in the military operations, and sometimes we spoke about it when it happens. But this should not be done in public. When soldiers are risking their lives, you cannot demoralize them in public, he explained. The premier once again insisted that Pakistan enjoyed more freedom of the speech than almost any Western country. And I use the word freedom very carefully after having spent almost 2 decades of my life in England, where they have very strong laws on slander, he stressed. There was a defamation case between me and an English cricketer star that I won because defamation laws are very strong there. But such slander laws don't exist in Pakistan. He lamented. I have been wrongly slandered as Prime Minister here and gone to court, but even as Prime Minister, I haven't been able to get justice. When the interviewer pointed out the new law only protected the security operators, the Premier insisted that as long as criticism is based on truth and facts, it will be accepted. Every day, our security forces lose people in battle. Every country protects its institutions, not when they do something wrong, but when they are being attacked, he concluded. Please subscribe for more videos. Click the bell icon for more updates.